Today's interview is with Rory Innes of the Cyber Helpline. I think you're really going to find this an interesting interview. If you're being stalked or there's anything to do with cyber crime or problems with exes, do listen to this because he's got a lot of very wise advice and things that anyone in this situation needs to know.
It's only half an hour and it's well worth listening right through to the end. He's just a tremendous speaker. Well, Rory, thank you very much for joining us. What we wanted to do was to have a chance to talk about the Cyber Helpline. And as you know, our interest is in the people who are in the family court who are suffering one kind of abuse or another. And that may well be online abuse or intrusion or harassment or stalking or simply abuse. And there are going to be plenty of people who want to know how to deal with that and where to go for help and where not to expect much help and so on. So it'd be really great to understand a bit about the background to what you're doing and an explanation of what you do.
Sure. And first of all, thanks very much for inviting me on. It's a great area for us to talk about, and we've got lots of experience here. The Cyber Helpline is a movement by the UK information security community to step in and fill the gap for support of victims of cybercrime in the UK. So if you're a member of the public, you don't understand IT, you don't understand IT security, which is pretty much everybody, and you come up against a cyber criminal or someone displaying malicious behavior online, you're kind of on your own. And so what we realized 3 or 4 years ago is that it's the information security experts in the UK who can step in and fill this gap and help individuals deal with those issues. So we take an intelligent chatbot that we've built. We have a team of around 70 volunteers from across the information security space in the UK. And we help members of the public and sole traders understand what's happened to them, because often people are confused about how they've got where they've got to. We help them contain the issue, so limit it and collect as much evidence as they can. We help them recover so they can get back to a place where they feel secure, they have their privacy back, and they've solved any of the other issues that are part of that case. And then we try and help them learn from the experience so they can be more secure and more confident as they're online in future. So we started our first case in May 2018, and we just put up a website and said, does anybody want some help? Anyone who's been hacked who needs some help? And we realized quite quickly we had a supply and demand problem. Lots and lots of victims in the UK, and not enough help. But what we've managed to do is scale to the point now where, as I said, we've got 70 volunteers, but we're helping around 450 people a month deal with their issue in cybercrime. And not just cybercrime in terms of fraud and people stealing money online, but in terms of bullying and stalking and grooming and all of the online problems that people might face.
Yeah. Well, it's really obviously grown, hasn't it? And I'm sure there's a huge demand as well when people get to know about the fact that you're available, because what we want to come to at one point is the other places people go and the kind of help they can get. But at the moment, just understanding who's coming to you, you may have some people who are in the family court for one reason or another who are having difficulties. How common is that for you amongst your caseload?
Yeah, really common actually, because when we started the Cyber Helpline, our kind of assumption as technical people was that these were going to be really technical problems that we were going to be solving. It was going to be malicious software, hacking of accounts. What we've actually found is that it's really human-driven issues that are driving people to us. So, for example, over 20%, I think 22, 23% of our cases are online harassment and stalking, cyber stalking or cyber enabled stalking. And what we see a lot is that situation where a partner may be fleeing, an ex-intimate partner, there are kids involved, they're involved with the family court, but there's still that technical control. There is still stalking or domestic violence or those other issues that are playing out where the cybersecurity part is just an aspect of it, but a really important aspect because of the ability to monitor location, communicate with children, and also try to um, tamper with evidence or the narrative of the story of what's playing out in the court. So I think it's definitely something we see on a regular basis.
And how does that split in terms of men and women? Do you have a sense of, is it one predominantly, or is it, how does that split?
I think if you look at the cyber helpline as a whole, it's almost exactly 50-50 male female in terms of the split. But actually, if you look at that in more detail and you break it down by the types of cybercrime or online issue that they might be facing. So we have something like 40, 45 categories of cybercrime that we cover. If you look at these kind of stalking, harassment, domestic violence, the stuff that we tend to see as part of the family court issue, that it's probably more likely to be 80-85% female. So for that type of crime or issue, much more heavily leaning towards females. And then you take other issues like sextortion, for example, where people are tricked into performing sex acts on video. It will be 90% male, 95% male. So the different types of attacks kind of split differently.
Yeah.
Are people being helped to do this though, Rory? Because you start by saying, a lot of us aren't very good at IT, and that's very true. How do people manage to achieve such success, it seems, in performing this and get away with it if actually they're not that au fait with how the systems work? I don't quite understand that. Are they helped by people? Do they pay people to help them?
That is an absolutely excellent question. And it's an excellent question because people assume that what is going on is really technical, that behind the screen of the cyber criminal, there is some sort of master technical person, doing lots of coding and, doing something really flash.
Looking like a hacker.
Yeah, exactly. And that is just not the case. Most of what we see is relatively simple. And if you think about cybercrime on a much wider sense, cyber criminals aren't particularly good at technology, although they have technology skills. What they're really good at is marketing. They're really good at spotting trends and saying, okay, there's a vaccine email that's about to go to everybody. Let's fake a vaccine email and get them to click on ours, and then that will enable the crime. So they're really good at spotting trends and understanding human behavior and how to manipulate it. If you look at the more kind of family court issue, it can be just as simple as that the individual knew their passwords and was able to log into their accounts. It could be they've had physical access to the devices, so they've been able to look at their messages and see how they're communicating. It could be that there's a family iCloud or Google account where you can see all of the devices and where they are. And so it's really most of what we see, particularly around the family court space, is regular people using regular tools that are out there for everyone to use, but using them maliciously. And that's the difference. And because the individuals who become the victims don't have high standards of cybersecurity, and in not almost all, in a good chunk of these cases, the individual has shown controlling behavior in the relationship. So they've probably set up their email account. They've probably set up their new device.
Yeah.
So they're in control of the passwords, how it's set up, what software is on it, what apps are on it. And so therefore they put themselves in a position where they can carry out those stalking behaviors, essentially.
They might even install tracking apps without
Yeah,
the other person being aware of it.
absolutely. Or it might be as simple as for example, on an iPhone, they might just use the Find My Friends app and just
Yeah.
set themselves up as a friend. And the person whose phone it is never checks and doesn't realize that they're being monitored all the time.
So this is easy stuff, isn't it, really?
Yeah,
And
really
people
easy
need to
stuff.
know that. People need to try to remember if they were helped to set up accounts and what might have happened during when the relationship seemed okay.
Well, certainly in our foray into IT with the On Record app, the advice we've constantly had is that it's the password which is the key. That's usually where people
The vulnerability
are
can
vulnerable.
be.
You
Yeah.
can encrypt as much as you like, but if people have your password,
Yeah.
they access everything you've got.
And what's really interesting is that we we kind of, we're used to the concept of we lock our front door and the bad guys are on the outside. The
Yeah.
problem in most of these situations is that it's the person you love who is beside you, who in 2 years' time you might be in family court with, who you've trusted with all of your information.
Yeah.
They know where you go every day. They know all your friends on Facebook. They know your
Yeah.
passwords. They know your PIN number. And so to be truly secure, and it sounds a bit dramatic, you just can't trust anyone. And in any relationship, you should have, separate passwords, separate accounts, so that you do have that privacy. Because even if you trust that person 100% now, what happens if that changes? And then you're at a point where you can reclaim back that privacy and those accounts. And so really it's just good behaviors, which are hard to do in the good times, but become really important when things get tough.
We're used to it with the post, where I think on the whole people don't open each other's mail.
Yeah.
But of
Yeah.
course, people haven't learnt that discipline in the online world.
And I think it would be you could get really worked up because you could imagine, for example, how did that person know where I'd gone and who I'd met? You might assume you're being followed everywhere, which
Yeah.
would really be very distressing, I imagine, if you think somebody's doing that. But in fact, they're not even leaving their room to find out where you've gone and who you might have been with.
And what happens is this: when you don't understand how it's happening and you don't have the technical skills to diagnose what might be technically possible here, it's quite easy to get to a place called hyper-vigilance where
Absolutely.
everything is involved. Your computer crashes, that's obviously the stalker or him or that person. Something pings or the wireless goes down, anything can be involved. And so it becomes really hard to say what is normal and what
Yes.
isn't normal and what's malicious and what's just normal activity online. And I think often that is what creates a real challenge for individuals. And sometimes it's as simple as, and we had one case where, this woman we were working with just couldn't work out how her ex-husband had managed to get into her email account. And it was quite an old email account. And you remember, you used to have this concept of just, put some standard questions like what month were you born
Yes.
or
Yes.
what's your pet's name.
Yeah.
And so her password recovery question and answer was, what's your dog's name, which was the name of the family dog, which everyone in the family knew. And
Yeah.
so, we went through that process with her and I was like, okay, so what, is the answer to this your dog's name? She was like, yeah. And he was like, well, does he know the dog's name? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, well,
There you
you
go
know,
then.
but people don't think that through at the time. So it's really easy to us, but it's not easy to someone who's not used to looking for these things.
So,
And so 9 times out of 10, maybe 9.9 times out of 10, it is really simple things being done with a big impact,
Yeah.
which are easy to spot and easy to deal with, but that's if you're looking at it with the right skill set.
so
A
are,
bit
are
of objectivity.
people come to you at some point, presumably after they've felt completely out of control at a late stage, really, in this kind of situation.
Yeah, I think that's true of certain issues for sure. I think, there's a stat somewhere about stalking that stalking victims will put up with 50 instances of the stalking or something like that before they seek
Really?
help. And I think that in the stalking area, the online harassment area, that's definitely true. They will deal with this large volume of stuff until it reaches a threshold where they think, actually, this is serious. I need to go and do something. But often we're not the first port of call because there are stalking charities there, the police, depending on where they want to go to. And so what can often happen, particularly in cyber stalking cases, is it can go to the stalking charities first, it can go to the police first, and then it will eventually come to us because it hasn't been resolved. There's a large technical element. And so sometimes we get in right at the start with some types of cybercrime. In sextortion or ransomware, they get a ransom note, they'll come to us and say, what should I do? With these real kind of family stalking, harassment type issues, it can be much further down the line until they get to us.
What happens when they go to the police then? Is that helpful? Do they get much help, do you think?
I think that it's a really challenging area because stalking tends to be a collection of incidents over a period of time. And if you think about the definition of stalking, it is someone who is showing obsessive behavior in an individual, and they will display a number of different behaviors. What tends to happen to most of the people who've been stalked is that they go to the police with individual incidents, and they'll say, okay, somebody slashed my tires here, somebody's knocking on my door at 4 a.m, this has happened online, and they're kind of treated as separate things.
Yeah.
And there's no narrative and long view of, okay, there's a pattern of behavior here. And because the victim might not call it stalking and the police might not understand stalking enough, nobody says, actually, hold on a second, this is stalking and this is really serious and we need to properly engage with it.
And they could be reporting it to different people as well. That's my experience of domestic abuse. You're talking to, say, 6 or 7 different people. The messaging doesn't end up in one place. And so they don't see the entirety of the problem.
Absolutely. And the other challenge is that if you want to report stalking, you go to the police station or you phone, 101, you report it to the police. If you are trying to report a cybercrime or an online fraud, you go to a police service called Action Fraud, which is a different thing. And a very small number of people ever hear back from somebody when they report cybercrime. It tends to be noted, reported, it's in the stats, but nothing really happens.
Right.
Really?
And so the challenge you have is that if you are being cyberstalked and you are solely reporting online issues, they might just be going into the abyss. And so nobody is sitting there with a single view of this individual saying, well, all these things are happening, we should go and talk to this person. And where I see the most success with the police is when they've already engaged with a stalking charity or a domestic abuse charity who can frame the narrative with the police and say, well, look, here's the risk we see. Here's the information about the perpetrator. This is what we think this is the law. You need to go and do something. And that's where we have the most success. And typically it is, a victim, a stalking charity or a domestic abuse charity, the cyber helpline, with looking at all those separate online, offline parts and presenting that picture and story to the police, which is where you'll get the most traction.
How high is the risk, Rory, of people finding that they're thought to be paranoid because they are presenting instances which may be impossible, or people think it's impossible, and so they're seen as mad rather than genuinely, with a real problem? Do you encounter that kind of?
Just to give a kind of perspective on that, there's a whole concern about the issue of parental alienation, where one parent is accused of fabricating a situation which they're saying the other parent is plotting against them. And so if somebody presents as paranoid and reporting them to the police, they can say, well, this person's just creating this impression of me as being a stalker, when in fact they're look at the things they're claiming. They're kind of insane suggestions. I mean,
the risk is extremely high.
Right.
And it's extremely high for a number of reasons. One, because over time, as the number of instances rack up, and remember, this isn't just getting 50 emails a day or 50 text messages a day. It is a whole different range of stalking behaviors. So there can be hundreds of thousands of individual instances which they are experiencing during the stalking. And that might be something as small as they're liking my content online. Every time they're liking it, they're commenting, they're making their presence felt. And so, one, there's a large volume of activity. Two, they can be in that hyper-vigilance state at the point of reporting to the police where they're actually not sure what's real and what's not real and what's technically possible and what is. And so the story can sound crazy. And we have this policy at the Cyber Helpline: you trust but verify, because quite often for these people, they're scared, there's the emotional side, they're reporting, and a stream of events come out. And some of those are possible, some of those are not possible, some of those need more investigation. And so you just have to believe that individual and work through to find evidence. And I think the third part to this is that the person who's coming round your house to take a report about this crime is not a cybersecurity expert.
No.
They're not technical, probably. They're a police officer who is skilled in a completely different thing. And so you take those first two things with the volume and the range of things, and I think he's watching me through the lamppost, and the police officer can't help but think this isn't real. And we've had instances where victims have reported to us that, a police officer saying to them, "This sounds crazy, like you sound crazy," which, if you have plucked up the courage to report and try and get help, that's the worst possible thing you can hear. And I know there's lots of work going in within the police to try and solve that problem. But the reality is there's a high risk that you won't believe. And the other challenge to that, there's a high risk that it will never be investigated. Because if, this abuse is being carried out on Gmail accounts and Facebook, and all the servers are sitting in the US and they're US companies, the chance of the police getting that information about the perpetrator from these US companies and having an investigation. So the minute they realize it's online and it's outside the UK, particularly if the perpetrator looks like they're out the UK, they know they're not catching this person. They're not going to charge anyone. So it becomes really simple just to shut it down and say, look, try and the old bullying thing, try and stay away from them, turn off your social media accounts. And that doesn't help, because the stalker is obsessed with that individual.
So they'll find another way of doing it.
Yeah, and you can't escape that person when it's your ex-husband and you're going to meet them in family court, or you're going through that process.
And you've got children in common.
Yeah, exactly. And
so there'll probably be, there may be people watching who actually have been called crazy or think that what they say sounds crazy, though, so they're already anticipating that they're probably not going to be believed. What can you do if you're in that situation, Rory, yourself, to try to, what kind of tactics can you use to be understood better and to be believed? And
so it's a really good question, and it's a question that relates directly to the proposition of on record, I think. And it's very much about, are you able to paint the picture of what has happened and what has been happening? And so if you think about the scenario we just talked about of police officer turns up and a person just fire hoses them with information about what's happening, who it is. And the best thing you can do, in my experience, is create a log and timeline of when did this start, what has been happening, is it escalating in terms of volume, is it getting more serious in terms of the impact, is the does it look like this stalking is escalating and getting more risky? And so I think if you can paint that narrative of, look, this has been going on for 6 months, here's how it started, here's how I can show you it's getting more serious, and you can give that picture to somebody, and you're collecting as part of that the evidence of, here's the phone number they phoned me from, here's the Facebook profile ID that they've been messaging me from, and then it moved to this one. That is a whole bunch of evidence and information that the police can then use. And I think in that case, they're much more likely to think, okay, there's a pattern of behavior here, which could be harassment, could be stalking. And if you know who the individual is, which is very likely in the family court scenario, and you can paint that picture of the background of the individual. Because if you think about risk assessment and stalking, it's very much about what behaviors have been displayed and what do we know about the individual, their crime record, their use of alcohol and drugs and history of domestic violence, those things. If you paint those two pictures, then you're much more likely to have that framed as the issue that it is.
Yeah.
But also getting the right help from domestic abuse, domestic violence charities, stalking charities, the cyber helpline, whoever it is, to help you kind of navigate what is going on here, where is the evidence, and how should we talk about this when we report it? Because people just don't have the language. None of us are legal experts in cybercrime world, and I'd argue that a lot of the police officers walking around aren't experts in cybercrime and cyber law either. And so you need help to navigate that, to understand, is this a crime? Is it not a crime? What is happening?
Well, it's nice that you mention on record.
Yes, thank you.
Your people are using it a bit, I think, to try and help people get this timeline together. Are you finding it helpful?
Yeah, we do, and we kind of sat back a while ago before we first talked and said somebody must have solved this problem. It's such a big problem in all of our cases of, whether it's identity theft, whether it is stalking, domestic abuse, these issues that go on for a long time, where you have to convince other people that something is happening, and it becomes hard to keep track. And also the other side to that of there's lots of people involved in trying to help these people. And how do you have one place where that evidence is or the timeline is, and people are able to kind of go in and look at that and see the picture and see the trend? And I think that, what was really interesting is we had a look and found you guys, and it was exactly how we'd envisaged what the solution should look like. And so I think that, I think it's really useful. I think that in a lot of our very serious cases, having that timeline and that tool to communicate with the individual about the instances and the events and the impact is really useful. So I think it has a really important part to play in helping victims of these issues. So it's definitely something that we'll continue to look at and embrace, I think.
That's nice to hear.
That's good. That's good. I mean, I think what people don't understand, Rory, I don't know whether you agree with me, but is that you have to, there's limited resources in terms of the police activity, in terms of helping. You have to get someone's attention and you have to do it quickly, because they're ready to move on to the next person to interview. And if you present in a less chaotic way, where you actually do keep records, it shows that you've got that capacity every time to keep a record of what's happened. You're looking much more professional than you. I can imagine what it must be like if you're going to visit somebody at their home and you just get this barrage of he's done this, she's done that, and then this happened, and you haven't got anything written down. They must just stare at you and be thinking, well, how on earth am I going to help you? And I think people need to understand that, really. You have to be the person that gets their attention, and you do it by looking organised, sounding sensible, and showing that you can prove what you're saying.
And I think that you have to remember, even if you've got the cyber helpline, you've got a stalking charity, you've got the police, you've got a social worker, whatever it is, you are still the person responsible for dealing with the issue. You're just
Yeah.
getting help. And so you can't hand over control of solving this problem because they're complex problems to solve, and everyone around you has a little part to play with their expertise. And I sat in on a meeting with a cyberstalking victim, where we met with the stalking charity. It was me from the cyber helpline, and we had a police officer. And we'd sent over a kind of background so that everyone could read through what was happening. We were meeting this because it was relatively high risk. And before the stalking victim came into the room, the police officer said, "I don't think there's anything we can do to help here." And I was sitting there and I said to him, "We haven't actually heard her talk yet." And he was like, "Yeah, I know, but it just looks like it. There's not much we can do." And I was like, "Well, why are we here?" Like, you just completely just bamboozled by it. Of you haven't heard the problem yet, but that's the starting point you've got to deal with. So, as you say, you've got to come prepared. You've got to be able to show what's happening, and you've got to make it easy to investigate and make it look easy that they might catch someone, because that's what they want to do. So it's very much about, and it sounds horrible because these people are in emotional distress and it's a really difficult situation. It's horrible what's happening to them, but they have to do their homework and be prepared if they're going to get traction, because the police are under-resourced, they're under-skilled, and they've got another 100 people like you who they might not even ever speak to. So it's about presenting the best possible case to them.
And it's another horrible description, but actually think of it as a sales pitch. You have to convince them to buy into your story and to help you.
But I think we find that people are grateful for straight talking. That is, being told plainly that this is what they have to do, and there'll be a better chance of a good result if they do it. I think people are grateful on the whole
I think
to know what it is they need to do. Because one of the terrible things for people is not knowing what they can do, just feeling helpless. But if they have a plan, that helps.
Agreed. And what's really difficult, though, is that often to get that evidence and to collect the narrative, you're asking the victim to trawl through all the behaviour. So you're asking them to keep tabs on exactly what he's saying in emails, how frequent they are. And the mental health load of that is extremely high. And so people want, it's always there. If you're being cyberstalked or you have a threat actor who is monitoring you, hacking you, and you're in this high stress situation like family court and there's lots of stuff at stake, and then you're saying, I need you to dive into all of this and map it out for me. And, so we have some users of our service who want help, but at the point of having to open up that laptop and log into an account where they know they'll see a message, they just can't bring themselves to do it. And what we don't do enough is think about the user experience for victims when they're reporting with the police, when they're doing these things. How do we protect them from a mental health point of view and make them feel safe as they're going through the reporting? So on one hand, it's really good to say, do your homework, do all this stuff and present the story. On another hand, if you are scared of your inbox or your phone or your internet connection at home because you believe that's what's being used by an ex-abusive partner, really hard to do that work. And so it's about, this is the other challenge with police engagement, it's about working at the pace of the victim. If they're not ready, it might take them 2 months to get to a point where they're ready to log in and do that work. And that's not really how it works when you go to report to the police. And so it's really trying to make sure that we give the person reporting the crime or seeking help the best possible chance of getting the right help. Some of that's evidence, some of that's mental health.
I think, Rory, if they think of it that they're being made helpless, they have a sense of helplessness.
And that's part of the purpose.
And that's the point. That's what the person is trying to achieve, to make them feel they're never going to get anywhere, they won't be believed, they won't be successful, it's all going to go horribly wrong, they're going to be punished. And if you can turn that into, well, try to ignore that sense of helplessness. This is a way of you getting back control.
Yeah.
And that would be the message I would like to give people, because otherwise they will just, this person who's attacking them will win. And they need to try and turn that round, don't they?
They do. And it takes, and we talk about this a lot. A lot of individuals come to us and say, well, everything is hacked, so what's the point?
Yeah.
Where do I start?
Yeah.
And our message is, look, you can't live like this forever. We can get you to a place where you feel secure and you have privacy online again. You might still have a threat actor, like an ex-partner or a stalker or somebody on the outside, but there will be a bit time when you feel safe again.
Yeah.
And we can take you on that journey. It might take a long time, but there is a lot of bravery to take that first step and start getting used to technology again.
It's such a good message, Rory.
Yeah.
This is such an important message. And I think it's a very good message to end on. I mean, we ought really to talk again, because we're very interested in simply understanding more about digital forensics, for example, and what people can hope for from other services.
Lots more to say. And
we ought to.
We'd love to talk to you again if you'd like to, Rory.
But, yeah, I'd love to. I'd be really keen.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Can we leave it there? But we hope to link up again soon.
Speak very soon. Thank you,
Sure.
Rory.
Great to chat.
Thanks.
Thank you.